We are now connected, and I have to say, this energy feels incredibly emotional right from the start. There is someone here who thought they could keep everything under control. Someone who believed they could stay quiet, stay composed, and carry these feelings without ever letting them reach the surface. But the more I sit with this energy, the more it feels like that is becoming impossible. Because what I'm picking up is not a passing attraction. It's not a temporary curiosity. It's something that has been growing in silence for much longer than you realize. Welcome, my beautiful Pisces. Let's see what is unfolding here. The first thing that immediately catches my attention is the star. And you know what's interesting? The moment the star appears, I don't feel panic. I don't feel chaos. I feel longing. I feel someone sitting alone with their thoughts, replaying conversations, remembering little details, remembering things that probably shouldn't matter as much as they do. Yet somehow they do. There is something about you that stays with this person. Maybe they tried to move on. Maybe they tried to convince themselves they were fine. Maybe they even told themselves that whatever existed between the two of you wasn't that serious. But every time they create distance, something keeps pulling their attention back. I keep hearing the phrase, "Why can't I stop thinking about them?" Because that's exactly what this feels like. This person cannot understand why your energy keeps lingering in their heart. The star keeps showing me someone looking toward the same light over and over again. And whether they admit it or not, that light feels very connected to you. What's really standing out to me is how hard this person has worked to hide what they feel. They don't strike me as someone who easily reveals their emotions. In fact, I think they became very skilled at pretending everything was fine. Even when they missed you, even when they wanted to reach out, even when they found themselves checking for signs of you, they learned how to appear calm. But appearing calm and actually feeling calm are two very different things. And that becomes even more obvious when the Ace of Cups arrives. This is where the energy shifts. Because suddenly, I'm not looking at someone who is simply thinking about you. I'm looking at someone whose emotions are becoming difficult to contain. It's almost as if they've reached a point where their heart is carrying more than their mind can manage. They may not understand why this connection affected them so deeply. That's something I keep picking up. Confusion. Not confusion about you, confusion about themselves. Because these feelings don't fit neatly into the boxes they created. This person may have experienced attraction before. They may have cared about people before. But something about this feels different to them. And I don't think they expected that. I don't think they expected you. I don't think they expected your kindness, your softness, your ability to make them feel seen. There is something very comforting surrounding your energy. Not because you solved their problems. Not because you rescued them. But because they could be themselves around you in ways they rarely allow anywhere else. The more I sit with this, the more I feel someone realizing that your presence became important long before they admitted it. And now they're trying to understand when exactly that happened. When did you become the person they wanted to talk to? When did your opinion start mattering so much? When did your absence start feeling so noticeable? Because that's what I keep seeing. Absence. And that absence has been speaking very loudly, especially with the King of Cups appearing here.
Okay.
This person is not wearing their heart on their sleeve. Not at all. If anything, they may have spent months trying to keep everything hidden beneath the surface. They became experts at controlling what they showed other people. They kept conversations safe. They avoided saying too much. They convinced themselves that if they stayed quiet long enough, the feelings would eventually fade. But they didn't. The King of Cups keeps sitting here like someone carrying an entire ocean behind a closed door. And the longer that door stays shut, the heavier it becomes. I keep getting this image of someone rehearsing conversations they never have, thinking about messages they never send, imagining what they would say if they finally allowed themselves to be completely honest. Because deep down, they know something has changed. They know this connection is affecting them. They know you matter more than they planned, more than they expected, more than they are comfortable admitting. And what surprises me is that I don't think this realization happened all at once. It feels gradual, like water slowly filling a room, one memory, one thought, one moment at a time, until suddenly there was no more room left to pretend. And that's where I feel this person standing right now, somewhere between silence and truth, somewhere between fear and vulnerability, trying to understand what happens when feelings that have been hidden for so long finally begin asking to be acknowledged. Because the deeper I go into this energy, the more it feels like this story is only beginning to reveal what has really been happening inside their heart. What keeps catching my attention is how much energy this person has spent trying to protect themselves from what they feel, not from you, from the feelings themselves. because there is a difference. The moon is sitting here in such a powerful way, and every time I look at it, I don't see someone who lacks emotions. I see someone who has emotions that feel almost too big to hold. You know what's interesting? Some people become distant when they stop caring. This person became distant because they cared more than they were comfortable with, and that created a problem. Because once feelings reach a certain depth, there is always risk involved. Risk of disappointment, risk of rejection, risk of discovering that someone matters more than you planned. I keep feeling this internal battle. Part of them wanted to move closer. Part of them wanted to know where this connection could go. But another part kept pulling the brakes. The moon feels like someone standing in front of a doorway they desperately want to walk through while simultaneously convincing themselves they should turn around. And I don't think many people realize how exhausting that can be, especially when your heart and your mind are no longer working together. The more I sit with this energy, the more I feel someone who tried to make practical decisions about something that was never entirely practical. Because feelings don't always follow rules. They don't always fit into schedules. They don't always arrive at convenient times. Sometimes they show up when life already feels complicated. Sometimes they appear when someone is trying to maintain control of everything around them. And I think that's part of what happened here. This connection arrived carrying more emotional weight than they expected. There is something about you that disrupted the story they were telling themselves. Maybe they thought they knew exactly what they wanted. Maybe they thought they knew exactly how their future should look. But your presence introduced questions they weren't prepared to answer. Questions like, what if this is more important than I thought? What if walking away doesn't actually solve anything? What if these feelings aren't disappearing? And that's where I start feeling the Eight of Cups. Okay, this energy feels different because I'm seeing someone trying very hard to convince themselves that distance would make things easier, that creating space would help them gain clarity, that walking away would somehow quiet their emotions. But every time I look at the Eight of Cups, I keep getting this strange feeling that the physical distance was never the real issue. Real issue was what they carried with them. Because you can leave a situation, you can avoid a conversation, you can stop checking someone's social media, you can stop reaching out. But if the feelings remain, the silence becomes loud, and that's exactly what this feels like. Silence becoming louder than words. I keep seeing someone sitting alone late in the evening, not distracted by work anymore, not surrounded by friends anymore, not busy enough to avoid their thoughts. And suddenly, everything catches up. The memories, the questions, the what-ifs, the things they wish they had said, the things they wish they had understood sooner. Because there is something about your energy that continues resurfacing no matter how far they try to place it in the background. And that brings me straight into the Nine of Swords. This card feels heavier than the others. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just heavy. Like carrying something for too long. I don't necessarily feel that this person is afraid of you. I feel they are afraid of what loving someone this deeply could require from them. Because love asks people to be vulnerable. Love asks people to be honest. Love asks people to risk being seen. And for someone who has spent a long time protecting themselves, that can feel incredibly uncomfortable. I keep hearing, what if I mess this up? That's the energy. Not certainty, not confidence, worry, self-doubt, second-guessing, thinking about every possible outcome before making a single move. Some of you may not even realize how often this person thinks about you. Because from the outside, they appear composed. They appear fine. They appear unaffected. But what I'm seeing underneath that surface is completely different. The Nine of Swords keeps showing me someone replaying moments, conversations, looks, words, silences, trying to understand what they missed, trying to understand why your presence continues affecting them. And there is another layer here that surprises me. I don't think they expected you to leave such a lasting impression. That's something I keep coming back to. This wasn't supposed to happen, at least according to the plans they had for themselves. Yet here they are, still thinking, still feeling, still trying to make sense of emotions that refuse to disappear. And the strange thing is, the more they resist these feelings, the stronger their awareness becomes. The moon keeps pulling hidden emotions to the surface. The Eight of Cups keeps reminding them that distance didn't provide the answers they hoped for. And the Nine of Swords keeps showing me someone who is finally becoming honest about how much this connection has impacted them. Because beneath all the fear, beneath all the hesitation, beneath every reason they gave themselves to stay silent, there seems to be a realization slowly forming. A realization that avoiding their feelings may have been easier than facing them at first, but avoiding them forever is becoming much harder than they ever imagined. What surprises me the most is that this energy no longer feels like someone trying to run from the truth. It feels like someone slowly turning around and looking directly at it. Because as judgment appears, there is this unmistakable feeling that certain things can no longer be ignored. You know, sometimes people don't change because somebody tells them to. Sometimes they change because life keeps putting the same lesson in front of them until they finally stop and pay attention. And that's exactly what I'm seeing here. There is a realization happening, not all at once, not dramatically, not with some grand announcement. It's quieter than that. It's happening inside them. I keep seeing someone reflecting on choices they made months ago, conversations they dismissed, warnings they brushed aside, feelings they tried to minimize. And the strange thing is, many of those moments look completely different to them now than they did before. Judgment feels like someone revisiting old memories with new eyes. The same memory, the same conversation, the same connection. Yet somehow everything looks different because they are different. The more I sit with this energy, the more I feel this person questioning assumptions they once believed were facts. Questions like, why was I so certain? Why did I push this away? Why was I listening to everyone except myself? Because there is definitely an influence here that seems to be losing its power. I don't know if it came from friends, family, past experiences, fear, or simply their own doubts. But whatever it was, it no longer feels as convincing as it once did. And that's where justice catches my attention. Okay, this feels important. Justice feels like somebody finally looking at a situation without all the noise surrounding it, without the opinions, without the pressure, without the expectations, just looking at it honestly. And what keeps coming through is a growing awareness that things may not have been as one-sided as they convinced themselves they were. I keep getting the feeling that this person spent a long time focusing on reasons not to trust what they felt, reasons not to move forward, reasons not to take emotional risks. But justice is creating a different perspective. Instead of looking for excuses, they are starting to look for truth, and truth has a way of simplifying things. Not because it makes everything easy, but because it removes the unnecessary layers, the stories, the assumptions, the fears disguised as logic. There is something about your energy that keeps standing out when I look at justice. I don't see manipulation. I don't see games. I don't see somebody trying to force an outcome. What I see is consistency. And I think that consistency is becoming harder for them to overlook. Because the more they reflect on your presence in their life, the more they recognize something genuine there. Something they may have underestimated. Something they may have misunderstood. What surprises me is that I don't think this realization is making them feel triumphant. If anything, it feels humbling. Because sometimes clarity arrives alongside regret. Not necessarily regret over everything, just regret over certain moments. Certain opportunities, certain things left unsaid. And as those feelings surface, the hermit begins to step forward. This energy feels very different from isolation. This feels intentional. This feels like someone creating space because they need answers that nobody else can provide. I keep seeing someone becoming less interested in what other people think, less interested in outside opinions, less interested in following expectations that don't actually belong to them. Because the hermit is showing me someone who is beginning to trust their own inner voice again. And that process hasn't been quick. In fact, it feels like it took a lot longer than they expected. Because when you've spent years listening to external noise, your own intuition can start sounding unfamiliar. But something is changing. The hermit keeps pulling them inward, away from distractions, away from influences, away from conversations that leave them more confused than before. I almost feel as though they're becoming protective of their thoughts. Protective of what they're discovering, because they aren't ready to let outside voices reshape their perspective anymore. And that's significant, very significant, especially for someone who once seemed uncertain about everything. I keep hearing this phrase, I need to figure out what I really feel, not what somebody else thinks, not what somebody else wants, not what somebody else expects, what they actually feel. And the more they sit with that question, the clearer certain things become. The more they revisit the connection. The more they revisit your presence, the more they revisit the impact you've had on them. There is something about you that continues remaining intact through every layer of reflection. That stands out to me, because usually when people overthink a connection, they start finding reasons to dismiss it. This feels different. The more they reflect, the more certain aspects become harder to dismiss. Not because they're forcing themselves to believe anything, but because honesty is leading them there. Judgment keeps bringing awareness. Justice keeps removing distortion. The hermit keeps guiding them deeper. And together, these cards feel like someone walking through a door that has been closed for a very long time. A door leading toward a truth they weren't quite ready to face before. What fascinates me is that this truth doesn't seem to be creating fear in the same way it once did. It feels more like acceptance, like somebody slowly acknowledging that a feeling can be real even if it doesn't fit their original plans, that a connection can matter even when they tried convincing themselves otherwise. And as this awareness continues unfolding, I keep sensing another layer beginning to emerge. A layer that has less to do with understanding what they feel and much more to do with deciding what they want to do about it. A picture keeps forming in my mind of someone standing in front of a message they haven't sent yet, not because they don't know what they want to say, because they care too much about how it will be received. And that changes everything. The energy feels different here, less focused on understanding their feelings and more focused on what happens when those feelings finally leave the safety of their own mind. Because Page of Cups is showing me somebody who has been carrying words around for a while. Words that started small, simple thoughts, simple emotions, simple questions, but the longer they remained unspoken, the heavier they became. You know what's interesting? I don't think this person is trying to come across as perfect anymore. Earlier, there was a strong need to maintain control over how they appeared, to protect their image, to protect their pride, to avoid looking vulnerable. That energy feels weaker here. The Page of Cups feels much softer, much more human, much more willing to admit, maybe I didn't handle this as well as I should have. And honestly, that realization alone feels huge. Because there are people who spend years avoiding accountability, years avoiding uncomfortable conversations, years pretending nothing happened. This feels like someone who is no longer finding comfort in avoidance. I keep hearing unfinished sentences. Things they wanted to explain, things they wanted to clarify, things they wish they had said when the moment was still there. Because the deeper I go into this energy, the more I feel somebody realizing that silence has a cost, and they know exactly what that cost has been. There is this strange tenderness surrounding them, almost like they're seeing the situation through a different lens, not defending themselves, not building walls, just looking at everything honestly. The Page of Cups keeps drawing my attention towards sincerity, not grand gestures, not dramatic speeches, just sincerity. A simple truth spoken from the heart can sometimes carry more weight than 100 perfect words. And that's where Knight of Cups begins stepping into the story. Okay, this energy feels nervous, very nervous, not because they don't care, because they care deeply. The Knight of Cups doesn't feel reckless here. If anything, they seem incredibly aware of what's at stake emotionally. I keep seeing somebody imagining different outcomes, imagining how a conversation could unfold, imagining your reaction, imagining whether enough time has passed, imagining whether they still have a place in your life. There is so much anticipation surrounding this energy. Because once certain things are spoken, they cannot be taken back. Once somebody opens their heart, there is no guarantee regarding what comes next. And I think this person knows that, which makes their hesitation understandable, not ideal, but understandable. What fascinates me is how often your energy appears in their thoughts when they're trying to make sense of everything, not in a fantasy-like way. In a very real way, I see memories resurfacing. Little moments, ordinary conversations, expressions, things you probably don't even remember saying. Yet somehow they stayed with this person. The Knight of Cups keeps showing me someone who has been emotionally revisiting those memories over and over again. Trying to find courage there, trying to remember why this connection mattered so much in the first place. Because whenever fear starts getting louder, those memories seem to pull them back toward their heart. And there is something beautiful about that. Not perfect, not easy, but genuine. What keeps coming through is a desire to be understood, not admired, not forgiven immediately, understood. Because I think there are pieces of their story they've never fully shared. Pieces they kept hidden. Not necessarily because they were trying to deceive anyone. Sometimes people hide things because they don't know how to explain themselves. Sometimes they don't have the language for what they're feeling. Sometimes they don't understand it themselves until much later. And this feels very connected to that. The more I sit with this energy, the more I feel somebody wanting to explain the version of themselves that existed back then, the fears, the confusion, the hesitation. Not to excuse it, just to give context. And that brings me straight into Eight of Wands. Something about this card feels impossible to ignore, because after all this reflection, after all this emotional processing, after all this inner conversation, the energy starts moving, not in a rushed way, not in a chaotic way, but movement is definitely present. I keep seeing thoughts turning into intentions, intentions turning into possibilities, possibilities turning into action, And for someone who spent so much time sitting with their feelings, that shift feels significant. Very significant. Especially because I don't get the sense that this person wants another chapter of silence. Silence has already taught them enough. The Eight of Wands feels like somebody becoming increasingly aware that some conversations cannot stay unfinished forever, that certain emotions cannot remain hidden indefinitely, that eventually there comes a moment where what is unspoken begins demanding a voice. And I think that realization is becoming stronger. Stronger than fear, stronger than hesitation, stronger than the stories they once used to protect themselves. There is still nervousness here, absolutely. I don't want to pretend otherwise. The nervousness feels real, the uncertainty feels real. But so does the desire to stop carrying everything alone. So does the desire to finally express what has been living inside their heart. And the more this energy unfolds, the more I feel something shifting from preparation into possibility, as if the conversation they've been rehearsing for so long is beginning to feels less like an idea and more like something they can almost reach out and touch. Something feels different the moment these cards come onto the table. Not heavier, not more complicated, just clearer. Because for so much of this reading, I've been looking at somebody, trying to understand their feelings, trying to sort through their fears, trying to make sense of everything happening inside them. What I'm seeing here feels less like confusion and more like realization. The Empress immediately catches my attention. And I have to be honest, this isn't showing me somebody obsessing over what they might lose anymore. It's showing me somebody finally recognizing what they've found. There is something about your energy that feels incredibly rare to them. Not perfect, not unrealistic, rare. I keep getting the feeling that this person has experienced plenty of connections in their life. They've met different people, had different relationships, shared different experiences. But something about the way they feel around you continues standing apart from everything else, because the Empress keeps drawing me toward comfort, toward peace, toward emotional safety. And those things become much more valuable when someone realizes how difficult they are to find. You know what's interesting? People often spend years chasing excitement, chasing intensity, chasing what looks impressive from the outside, only to discover that what they truly needed was peace. And I feel like that's part of the awakening happening here. This person is beginning to understand the difference between temporary excitement and genuine emotional nourishment. When I look at the Empress, I don't see somebody imagining a fantasy. I see somebody imagining what life could feel like if they stopped fighting their own heart. And that's a very different energy. The more I sit with this card, the more I feel them appreciating things they may have overlooked before. Your kindness, your patience, your understanding, your ability to create a sense of calm around people. There is something incredibly grounding about your presence, and I think this person is finally allowing themselves to acknowledge just how much that matters. Four of Wands appears beside the Empress, and immediately my attention shifts towards stability. Okay, this is where the energy becomes very interesting, because the focus no longer seems centered around a moment. It's centered around something lasting. I keep getting images of ordinary life, morning conversations, shared routines, simple moments that most people take for granted. And somehow those are the moments standing out the most. Not grand adventures, not dramatic declarations, just togetherness. There is something beautiful about that, because it tells me this person's feelings are becoming more grounded, more real, more connected to everyday life. The Four of Wands feels like somebody imagining what it would be like to stop standing outside looking in, to stop wondering, to stop questioning, to stop observing from a distance. Because there comes a point where a connection stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like something that belongs in reality. And that's what I keep seeing here. The more they reflect on you, the more their thoughts naturally drift toward building rather than avoiding, toward creating rather than protecting themselves, toward connection rather than distance. And honestly, I don't think that shift happened easily. It feels earned. It feels like something that developed after a lot of inner work, after a lot of difficult realizations, after a lot of uncomfortable honesty. Then 10 of Pentacles arrives, and wow, this card changes the atmosphere completely, because suddenly I'm looking at someone whose perspective has expanded far beyond the present moment. They're no longer focused only on emotions. They're thinking about value, meaning, longevity, what actually matters in life. I keep hearing somebody ask themselves, what am I really building? And surprisingly, that question seems to bring them back to you, again and again, because 10 of Pentacles feels like somebody beginning to understand that success means very little if it isn't shared with people who truly matter. Achievements, responsibilities, goals, all of those things have their place. But there is a growing awareness here that emotional fulfillment deserves a place in their life too. A very important place. The Ten of Pentacles keeps showing me someone realizing that some connections don't simply pass through your life unnoticed. Some connections leave fingerprints on your future. Not because they force themselves there, because they naturally become part of the way you see the world. And your presence seems to have done that. You have influenced this person more than they originally understood. Not through pressure, not through demands, just through authenticity. And finally, I find myself staring at Two of Cups. And honestly, there is something incredibly sincere about this energy. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just sincere. Because the Two of Cups feels like somebody looking beyond fear for the first time. Not because fear has disappeared. Fear is still here. I can feel it. But it no longer seems to be making the decisions. That's the difference. For so long, fear appeared to be leading the way. Fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of change, fear of losing control. The Two of Cups feels like somebody quietly asking themselves whether those fears are worth sacrificing something meaningful. And I don't think they're finding the same answers they once did, because every time they try to imagine moving forward without acknowledging what they feel, something doesn't sit right. Something feels unfinished, incomplete. The connection continues asking for honesty, not perfection, just honesty. And what fascinates me most is how much softer this person's energy feels compared to where it started. Less guarded, less defensive, more open, more willing to listen to their heart instead of arguing with it. Because the deeper I look into the Empress, the Four of Wands, the Ten of Pentacles, and the Two of Cups, the more it feels like somebody standing at the edge of a completely new understanding of what this connection means to them, and perhaps even more importantly, what they are finally ready to stop running from. And that's all I'm seeing in this energy today. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this space with me. I always say this, but your presence truly means more than you know. What keeps lingering with me from this reading is the feeling that some emotions can be hidden for a while, but they can't stay hidden forever. Eventually, the heart wants to be heard. So take care of yourselves, my beautiful Pisces. Trust your own wisdom, trust your own journey, and allow things to unfold one step at a time. Thank you again for spending this time with me. I appreciate you more than you know, and I'll see you in the next one.